You know that giant wall of text you scroll past just to click I agree? We've all done it. But what if I told you that document, the terms of service, is basically the entire rulebook for our digital lives? Well, in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and actually figure out what it all means. But first, let me ask you a quick question. What do you think is the most popular, most widely accepted work of fiction in all of human history? Go on, take a guess. You got it. The terms of service. All right, so it's a bit of a running joke, right? But it points to something totally true. We all agree to these things every single day, and almost none of us actually read them. So let's change that. Let's take a look at what we're all signing up for. So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll cover what a terms of service, or TOS, actually is. Then, we'll see how your click makes it a real, legit contract. We'll get into the rules of the digital road, look at the company's legal safety net, and wrap it all up by figuring out why any of this actually matters to you. Okay, Section 1, the agreement you always skip. Seriously, try not to think of the terms of service as just some boring document. It's so much more than that. It is the fundamental legal architecture of the entire internet. It's the blueprint for how we interact with pretty much everything online. So what is a TOS, really? Well, at its core, it's doing three big things all at once. It's managing risk for the company, it's setting up the rules for how the service actually works, and it's putting in writing what you can expect from them and what they expect from you. It's really the foundation of the whole relationship. And that brings us right to our second section, making the contract real. How in the world does a simple click of a button turn into a legally binding commitment? It sounds kind of crazy, but there's a real process here. Here's how it all goes down. It starts with what's called acceptance. That's you clicking agree or even just continuing to use the service. That's step one. This usually involves explicit consent, when you have to check that little box. Put those two together and bam, you've just created a binding agreement. That's a real contract that can be enforced in court. And this is super important to remember. This is not a one-way street. That agreement creates mutual obligations. You have responsibilities, for sure, but so does the company providing the service to you. Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, the rules of the digital world. This is the part of the TOS that lays out all of these specific do's and don'ts for using the service day to day. Think of it like a balancing act. On one side, you've got your obligations as a user, things like, providing true information and not doing anything illegal. But on the other side, the provider has its own duties, like trying to keep the service up and running and following the law themselves. It's supposed to be a balance. The TOS sets these rules using a few key ideas. Fair use basically defines what normal, reasonable activity looks like. Then you've got the usage rules zone, which is like the official boundary line between what's okay to do and what's not. And if you cross that line, well, then you're in violation territory. And that's where consequences, like getting your account shut down, come into play. All right, on to Section 4, and this part is huge and often really misunderstood, the company's safety net. These are all the clauses put in there specifically to protect the service provider from risk. This safety net is built with some powerful legal tools. First up is the disclaimer. This is basically the company saying, hey, just so you know, here are all the things we are not responsible for. It sets clear boundaries. Next, you've got the limitation of liability. This is a huge one. It puts a cap on how much money the company could ever have to pay out if something goes wrong and you decide to sue. It's a massive financial shield for them. And finally, the warranty disclaimer. This is where you always see that famous phrase, as is. It basically means the service comes with zero guarantees. It might be perfect, it might be buggy, you get what you get. Our source material says it perfectly. A primary job of the TOS is to be a risk mitigation instrument. Fancy words, but it just means that all these clauses we just talked about are there for one main reason: to slash the provider's legal and financial risks as much as possible. And there's one more piece to that safety net: intellectual property. These clauses make it absolutely crystal clear who owns the logo, the software code, the name, and all the content on the platform. It's all about protecting the company's most valuable stuff.
Okay, let's pull it all together in our final section, why this all matters. We've looked at all the little pieces, so now let's zoom out and see the big picture they create.
So let's just recap real quick. You have the foundation. That's what creates the actual legal contract. Then you have the rules. That's what defines how everyone is supposed to behave. And finally, you have the protections. That's how the provider manages its risk. See, Every component has its own very specific job. And when you put all those pieces together, they don't just make a long, boring document. No, they create what you could call a coherent legal ecosystem. It's like a tiny, self-contained digital world with its own laws, its own customs, and its own consequences, all designed to work together. And what's the whole point of this ecosystem? What does it yield? Well, the end result is supposed to be a stable, predictable, and enforceable agreement. The ultimate goal here is legal clarity, making sure that both you and the company know exactly where you stand with each other. Because in the end, that's really the whole point. A good terms of service tries to balance the company's risks with your rights as a user. It's all about clarifying who's responsible for what, so we can have a digital world that's just a little more predictable and stable for everybody. So I'll leave you with this final thought. The terms of service isn't just some text you scroll past. It is, quite literally, the legal code for the digital society you live in every single day. So the real question is, shouldn't you probably know its laws?